Hi, everybody. Let me put my camera on. There we go. Welcome to today's not quite noon meeting, 12:30 noon meeting. I hope those online can hear us all right. And thank you for those in the room. Yeah, do you want to shut the door because there's something going on next door. People should be able to access. We're expecting maybe that some people will trickle in and out. Particularly the students who have class until 12:30. So there might be some disruption, people coming in and out the room and online. But thanks for joining us. So for those who don't know me, I'm Tammy Phillips. I'm the chair of the Departmental Research Committee, and we're using this noon meeting slot really as an opportunity to share our DRC process and to provide some tips which will hopefully help with your admin if you're submitting new research protocols, either as staff or students or supervising students. It should all be useful. So it's a bit of an orientation to our process. The meeting is being recorded and we'll post it on the DRC website as well. Yeah, we're going to present a little bit and then hopefully have time for discussion of challenges and things that people are experiencing. There we go. So we'll just do a run through of who we are, and as I said, a walkthrough of our processes, some of the common issues that people experience. Sorry, I'm just trying to get it that I can see the slides on this side. There we go. There we go. It should be in business now. Okay. So firstly, who are the DRC? So the DRC exists as a kind of interface between the department, the School of Public Health, and the faculty. So we are here to guide departmental research activities, to liaise between research ethics, the Human Research Ethics Committee and the department, as well as the faculty, research priorities, research budget, things like that. We try to do what we can to promote research in the department, and we organize, I know this one, it like comes and goes. We organize the research day, many of you will have been a part of, that's coming up in September. We complete scientific review of every protocol that comes through the department, and we really try to share any research-related information or opportunity that comes through. Who we are, so Lisa Marie is online. You're welcome to turn your camera on briefly and wave if you want to, Lisa Marie. Is online today. She's the departmental administrator who supports the DRC. I'm the chair. Patience is here in the room as our co-chair. And then we have representation from every academic division and unit within the school. So just take note of who your people are in your division if you have any questions or any requests, I guess, from the DRC. The main purpose of today is to talk about processing new research proposals, because that forms a bit of like an administrative headache sometimes for people. We try to make it as streamlined as possible, but it is ultimately a bureaucratic process that needs to be followed. So as I said, all research proposals must come through the DRC. You're not allowed to directly submit to HREC. If HREC gets an application that hasn't been through a DRC, they will send it back and say it needs to go through a DRC. For a protocol to come through our school DRC, there has to be a School of Public Health investigator on the protocol. They don't necessarily have to be the PI, but there has to be involvement of somebody from the school, so we check for that. Just for context, we processed 126 new protocol applications last year, up a little bit from the year before. The majority of them are for expedited review, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and the vast majority are degree purposes. So obviously our MPH and MSc programs are huge. We have also a lot of PhD students, so about 80% of the protocols are for degree and the rest are staff initiated. We aim to get back to you with an initial response within 5 to 10 days. That may include comment based on the review that happens within the DRC. If there are no issues, then it will be signed off and then you'll receive it back with instruction of how to submit it to HREC. On average, in 2025, it was 14 days from the time of when we received a protocol, from the time that you got the fully signed form. So we are proud of ourselves. And I believe we do reasonably well in comparison to other DRCs and the faculty. So this is just a summary of the administrative process that's now disappeared and come back again on the main screen. So this is Lisa Marie's package of work for the DRC and what she holds in the background, which we often don't understand or appreciate. So I think it's useful for us to step through it. So Lisa Marie will receive your email. She checks that it's the correct document version. She corrects that everybody signed where she checks that everybody signed where they should have, that everything is included in the pack. She logs it. So we have a spreadsheet where we log all submissions. It gets allocated to a DRC reviewer. We have 5 reviewers who pulled from the team in the DRC, get sent out for review. The initial review happens. It'll come back to Lisa Marie, perhaps with some comment, maybe that might be administrative, it might be on the science, it might be that something's missing from an ethics perspective. This gets sent back to the PI. On the protocol, the student, they are asked to respond, correct the forms, send it back. Once we get it back, the DRC signs it off, and then it goes to the head of department, to Sue Cleary, to sign off. One tip to remember there is that your head of division or head of your research center can sign in that HOD spot on the ethics form, but only if they are not a listed investigator on the protocol. So for instance, in Div Epi, Landon can't be the PI or a co-investigator on the protocol and also sign as head of division. Then it would have to go to Sue or to another head of division in the department. Then you'll get back your fully signed pack with the details of how to submit to ethics. So it's quite a streamlined process actually for quite a lot of checks. A note on dates. So you'll see on the DRC website, we have put together a list of dates for DRC submission deadlines and HREC deadlines. So the HREC has their own set of dates, and we align with that, giving the DRC a bit of a window to reach the HREC deadlines. What's important to note is that protocols that are expedited, which are minimal risk, can be submitted at any time. They don't have to meet those deadlines. So the dates that are given in the calendar of dates are for HREC full committee review meetings, and usually those protocols are more than minimal risk, or there's some complexity to the protocol that requires it to go to full committee. The vast majority of what we do within the school, both staff and student research, usually is we can motivate for expedited review, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So in that context, the main date that actually becomes a problem for us is the end of the year. So HREC closes at the end of the year for a period of time, and that's usually about the time that we get flooded with new protocols because people want to get their protocol in before the end of the year. They want to have it approved by January, but everything shuts down. So just to be aware, if nothing else, then of those end of year dates. So this year, our DRC deadline for expedited review protocols to be reviewed in the 2026 year is the 5th of November. If it comes to us after that, we can't guarantee that it will get to HREC in time to be reviewed in 2026. It'll go through to the first 2027 set of reviews. Just a little bit on expedited review. So there's really nice guidance on the HREC website, but the main thing is thinking about the level of risk. So the way they frame it is that the probability and magnitude of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research is not greater than what would ordinarily be encountered in daily life or during routine care. So for instance, studies that are taking a blood draw or a urine specimen, like that would normally happen for somebody in care. I do a lot of work in pregnancy, where it's like a normal part of routine care. That's often, if it's not like an excessive amount or sort of there's other things around it, but it would often still be considered as a minimal risk study. You're not expecting people to do anything outside what they would ordinarily be expected to do. Secondary data analyses are usually considered minimal risk. Observational studies, qualitative research, focus group discussions, things like that, usually considered minimal risk. And then you just need to motivate for why it fits the expedited review categories. The most useful guidance for that is this eligibility for expedited review for US federally funded grants. And I think HREC uses that as a kind of a way of allowing us to motivate which category we fall in. I would just say that you're not it's not guaranteed that you will get expedited review. So it's possible that you motivate for expedited review and HREC says, actually, we think this requires full committee. And then you would have to wait for the next full committee date for them to go through that process. So that's useful to keep in mind. But most of what we do is expedited review. Just in terms of what we are actually signing for, and so that you understand that this isn't just a, I suppose, a tick box exercise or trying to make life difficult for you in the department. So if you're doing a staff submitted protocol, a protocol that's not for degree purposes, you're required to include an initial layer of internal scientific review. That's what we call an R1 form. And we've just updated the form. It'll be circulated on the website this week. So we have a new form, same process. Everything is the same. It just is a little bit more easy to follow and provides a little bit more scaffolding and guidance for the reviewer. That usually happens before it comes to the DRC. And that internal reviewer is usually somebody from your division. It could be just somebody from within the school who has the relevant expertise to review, who's doing a full scientific review. Are there any issues that need to be addressed before this goes to the DRC, before it goes to ethics? That's our first layer. It's not required on student protocols. So just to say that if it's a protocol that's for degree, the expectation is that through the supervision process, these issues have already been resolved. So the R1 is specifically for staff initiated and non-degree research. So that's the first layer of scientific review. Then the PI or the primary supervisor and the student have to sign. They ultimately take full responsibility for the research that's being done. Any student research that comes through, it is the supervisor who signs as the PI. The student can't be the PI. The staff member has to sign as having oversight and full authority on the research. Then the DRC chair or co-chair signs. And we are saying that we have reviewed, the department has reviewed the protocol. We're doing a second layer of scientific review and an administrative check. And we're saying, like, as a department, we're comfortable that this is likely to yield useful results. There's nothing that we think is problematic here. And we like putting our stamp of approval on the protocol. And then similarly, the head of division or the HOD signs off again to say that this research, both the researcher has the skills and training to do the research, and that this research, and there's adequate resources for the school to support the research. So that's the kind of layers of signatory that it goes through. This is what the updated R1 form looks like. I've just taken a snip. I'm not going to go through it in any detail, but I would encourage you, we'll send it around on the info mailer, and do take a look at it if you're doing staff initiated research. And if you have any questions at all, do contact us. As I said, this is really our first layer of internal review. We have had in the past issues where it is very much done as a kind of tick box exercise, and you're like, I'm quickly trying to reach the deadline, so I'm just going to ask my neighbor to quickly sign this R1 form off. That doesn't help us really at all. And it really is intended to be a collegial process where we can strengthen the protocol before it goes through the DRC, before it goes through HREC, pick up any issues before it gets stuck in a bigger process and delays things. But usually it's a relatively straightforward process. The other update that I just wanted to flag is around HREC training requirements. I think most of you will have seen this already, and there was just recently a new letter that was circulated. So the plan was that this was going to be implemented from the 1st of January, that all researchers needed to have completed ethics training, and that certification had to be included in the pack that you submitted to ethics. They've now sent out a revised notification to say that, well, there's a grace period being provided until July. So as of 1st of July, everybody has to have ethics training. The other thing that has been added into that is that it did initially just said all people named on the protocol, and now it says all researchers or people involved in the research, field staff, data managers, anybody who has contact with the data. In the same way, so this is a normal requirement for anybody who's had NIH funded work, and I'm sure it's this, I haven't had sort of European funding, but I think it's the same. A lot of funders require this anyway, that all of your staff are human subjects trained. And now that is part of the national, South African national ethics guidelines. So they're just getting in line with those guidelines. Again, more information is on the website, including the link. Obviously, the HREC website has the notice, and we've got additional guidance on the school website. So to check that out. But what will happen now, if you submit your protocol and it doesn't have the ethics training certificates, we won't block it at this point until July, but we'll remind you that you need to have that done by July. And it will be required to be included for annual renewals as well. So new protocols and annual renewals. Some important links. Most of this is on the DRC website, so I would encourage you to use that as your first point of call. The HREC processes, the HREC website itself is full of very useful information, and the DRC processes are all on the website. Make sure you're using the current UCT forms. That's always an issue. I think we've got a bit better with that over the years. HREC's very sticky with form versions, so don't just use the form you used last year. Make sure you download the correct form from the UCT forms website. And then we have a bunch of additional resources on the DRC page around race and research, AI use, publication, and looking for journals that have publication agreements with UCT, things like that. We're trying to consolidate that. If you have ideas of things that would be useful, we're always looking to update our kind of resources section. So feel free to send that through to us. So I'm going to pause here and hand over to Patience, who's just going to step through the process. Yeah. If there are comments or questions, I suppose maybe to just pause there before you do the process and just see if there's any questions or comments from anybody. I can't actually see the teams. Thank anyone in the room. Yeah, go for it, Hayley.
School? I think that's on one side of the
Yes.
Yes.
So for student research, it can be approved that the primary supervisor or the PI is not from within the school, and we have that quite often. For instance, we have students who are doing work through maybe a different department or something like that. It has to be approved by the track convener to say that they are comfortable that this person understands the scope of the degree sufficiently, and it's strongly encouraged and may be required by the track that you would have a co-supervisor who is within the school who can provide that support.
Yeah. Okay, it is possible.
It is possible, but you should chat to the track. Andrea, I can see your hand. Go for it.
Thanks, Tammy, to you and the team. This is really helpful and informative. I have a question just about the ethics training. From my understanding that co-supervisors who are not within UCT or maybe honoraries would still need to do the ethics training. And is that also the case for co-PIs on projects?
Yeah, so my understanding of the way that I have read the guidance is that everybody who is involved in any kind of human subjects activity on the project would need to have the ethics training. And so that would be interpreted as like if a co-PI or a co-investigator or a co-supervisor is involved in the design of like how you're going to do the human subjects research, then that would apply in the same way as the local PI or the UCT PI. So that's the way that I've interpreted it. I think anybody who's listed on the protocol and then anybody who's involved in the actual data collection, analysis, processing would be required to do it.
But not for systematic reviews then?
Not for systematic reviews, because you would be, although they do say, sorry, I stand to be corrected, because in the guidance they do say that this is required even if you're submitting a document review research, that it does specify that, which is maybe something we can clarify with HREC, because when you're submitting that protocol, you're requesting a waiver of human ethics review because there are no human subjects. So I'm happy to flag that with them. But as the guidance stands at the moment, they specify specifically systematic and scoping reviews are also listed.
Thanks, that would be helpful. Thank you.
They accept answers.
Yes, yes. So that's a good point, Nsiki. So the recommended training is the UCT success factors. Two of the I think there's 5 or 6 modules now, and it's 2 of those modules that are recommended. The one on data management, not recommended, required. The one on human subjects protection and the one on data management. You can, if you don't have access to success factors, or you already have completed training through another platform that is accepted, and they provide a list of what trainings are accepted. In the current guidance that they've just shared, they specify that the training has to include an assessment. So it can't just be that you completed a workshop and you got a certificate. The training has to include an assessment with proof of completion and passing that assessment. So they've made it a little bit more stringent. But yes, there is a list of other trainings you can do. There's one by the WHO, the HREC one is there, that are freely available. So that's also an option. Any other questions? I'm going to hand over to Patience.
Okay.
I can make this go away.
Cool. Thanks, Tammy. So before we begin walking through the research process, as Tammy had mentioned, okay, yeah. As Tammy has mentioned, most everything that we're going to go through is actually listed on the website. There is a lot of resources there, so make this your first go-to place when you begin your research. The page is organized according to the type of researcher, including research processes for staff, research processes for degree students, that's both master's and PhD. Cool. So we'll now talk about how the research process actually begins. Obviously, for both degree and non-degree research, the core starting point is developing a full research proposal. However, for students, there is an important step that comes before this. Students must first register with the Faculty Postgraduate Office, which happens through PeopleSoft. And to complete that step, you'll need 3 key things. That is obviously a research topic, a supervisor, and you need to have completed your memorandum of understanding. Once you submit your MOU, your supervisor will also receive a notification prompting them to complete their section. And after that administrative step, both students and staff move to the same stage, which is developing the full research proposal. Students typically do this with their supervisors, while staff may develop the proposal with their research team. And at this stage, it's very important to actually consult the HREC website, which contains guidance on ethical requirements, documentation requirements, policies, and any submission deadlines. And once your proposal is complete, students are ready to move to the ethics submission. However, for non-degree research, as Tammy has already previously mentioned, there is one additional step before the ethics submission, and that is the internal review process. So if you're a student, you would usually discuss this with your supervisor, but if you're a staff member, you consult. This is if you're a student doing non-degree research, you would have to discuss the internal review process with your supervisor to obtain an appropriate internal reviewer. And then if you're a staff member, you would consult your HOD or center director or even the DRC, who will identify an internal reviewer for you. And the key thing here is that, again, as Tammy has mentioned, the reviewer should be a senior researcher with expertise in your research area, someone who can actually interrogate the proposal and strengthen it. And for staff research, the reviewer completes the R1 form, which documents the internal review process. Again, you've seen a snippet of it from Tammy. And however, the students do not need to complete this form. The students can only complete it if they're doing non-degree research. Oops, sorry. So the R1 form also asks, the R1 form asks for, hold on, sorry. Sorry, just lost in my presentation. So yeah, the R1 form asks whether the proposal has already gone through the external review, and if this has happened, it should be noted. Again, all this information is available on the website, and once the reviewer sends feedback, you revise your proposal accordingly, and then you submit the R1 form together with the proposal to the DRC. For degree research, this step is mostly handled or largely handled through supervisory review. And for PhD students, the PhD defense process essentially serves as a similar purpose. So it's a structured opportunity for critical feedback on the proposal. And then the next stage applies to both degree and non-degree research. This is the stage where attention to detail becomes extremely important. And one of the most common pitfalls is, again, as Tammy has mentioned, is completing outdated versions of forms. So it's always advisable to check the HREC and DRC websites to make sure that you are using the most recent versions. Some of the key forms include the new application form, that is the FHS 013, the PI synopsis form, FHS 014, and the FHS 015, which guides the preparation of the research proposal or protocol. So these forms should be completed together with your supervisor if you're a student, and they must be accompanied by all the necessary supporting documents. These may include things like participant information sheets, consent forms, data collection tools. And again, just an important reminder, students cannot be listed as their PIs. For degree research, the supervisor is always listed as the PI. Okay. So once everything is completed, the next step is to assemble the submission package that goes to Lisa Murray. And the package should include the final research proposal, all completed forms, the R1 documentation where applicable, a cover letter, and if you're requesting expedited review, a motivation explaining why. All these documents should be combined into one single PDF file, and supporting material should also be included as appendices. These include things like the consent forms, approvals related to a parent study if you're doing a mini study and a parent study, data collection instruments, and essentially the goal here is to make the submission clear, organized, and easy for reviewers to navigate. So after submission, the process moves into the review phase, the slide that Tammy showed. So first, the DRC administrator conducts the quality checks to make sure all the documents are present and correctly formatted. The proposal is then assigned to a DRC reviewer, thanks to our DRC reviewers who go through who do a tremendous work behind the scenes of doing the reviews. So the DRC reviewer evaluates the submission and provides feedback. You'll then be required to address the reviewer's comments, revise the proposal, and then resubmit the documents to DRC for signature. Once the DRC has signed off, you can submit the full package to HREC via email. And if everything is in order and the application is approved, you've included all the ethics documents, everything that Tammy has spoken about. If everything is in order, you receive your ethics approval letter along with your HREC reference number. However, it's important to note that the ethics approval is only valid for 1 year. So if your study continues beyond that period, you need to submit an annual renewal. And in addition, depending on the study setting, other approvals may also be requested or required. For example, if your research involves public sector facilities, staff, or participants, you may require approval from the relevant government bodies. And if your research is conducted both maybe outside of South Africa, you may require additional RB approval from the host countries. And these approvals must be obtained before the research begins. So once you have your approval, your HREC number, and all the other approvals from the different bodies, if you're doing any research that requires that, the next step is continuing your research if it's going beyond 1 year. So finally, once your study is underway, it is essential to ensure that the ethics approval remains active throughout the entire research period. So before your approval expires, usually after 1 year, you must submit a renewal application using FHS 016 form. Again, ensure that it's the latest on the website. And one practical tip is actually to set a calendar reminder, because HREC does not send automated reminders. And if you need to make changes to the study protocol, for example, changes to the methodology or participant recruitment, you need to submit an amendment request using form FHS 006. And then renewals and amendments go directly to HREC. So they do not need to go through the DRC again. And finally, if there's been a protocol deviation, for example, delay in renewing ethics approval, the relevant form to submit is FHS 011. So following these procedures will help us ensure that the research remains ethically compliant, administratively sound throughout its duration. So ultimately, the goal of the processes is not simply administrative compliance. They exist to ensure that the research we conduct is actually rigorous, ethical, and respectful of the individuals and the communities involved. So by carefully following these steps from, let's say, proposal development all through the process that we've gone through, we strengthen the integrity of our research. And yeah, that is what allows our work to contribute meaningfully to science and to the communities we serve. I'll now hand over to Tammy to talk about the common things that are flagged in the review process.
Thanks, Patience.
It's not a question.
Yeah.
As a new supervisor, the flow chart that you just showed on the website was like unbelievably confident.
Yay!
It works. I used it like all my students use it, and it makes so much sense. So that's great.
Thank you. And if you pick up errors, please tell us or anything else. Yeah. Thanks for the feedback.
Thank you.
I see, Andrea, go for it. You've got a question as well.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to Patience. My question is, my understanding has always been that even when the students have completed their thesis and even graduated, if they are still working on their publication and going to submit it to a journal, they need to keep their ethics approval valid. So I just wanted to highlight that point.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's correct. And maybe that is something we can update to just make that clear on the thing. It's definitely, in my experience, something that is a struggle with students. Sometimes it can take a while to get to the publication stage. And then because as the PI, you would get the, it falls on you, right? Like the student actually doesn't necessarily know, and to have that on the radar with the student, that it's their responsibility, I think, or it's a shared responsibility, and there's a calendar reminder and a process around that, definitely. And then the other thing is closing out projects. I think we do a terrible job of closing out the projects that are actually finished, which leaves HREC with a big burden of studies that are kind of in limbo. And so the more we can, we don't want to close out prematurely, because it is possible to reopen a closed study, but it's you want to keep it open as long as necessary. Similarly, if you have students perhaps doing secondary data analysis on a past study, you need to keep the parent study open for as long as there are ongoing activities using those data is usually the requirement. So the HREC will ask for the current ethics approval for the project that the data are coming from, if that's relevant. Thanks for raising that, Andrea. So yeah, we just wanted to discuss, and there's other DRC reviewers in the room, so this can be like, I pulled out a few things that commonly come up, but we can also have it as a bit of a discussion, and if people have had particular issues, also feel free to raise them. So the cover letter is a really important document, and just to say, like, the cover letter and the synopsis are really the thing that probably mostly get engaged with before people dive into the details. So the cover letter is really useful to tell both us and HREC any key information that needs to be there. Like, this is for student degree purposes. This is attached to whatever other study, whatever key information you think needs to be in there. You don't want like a 10-page cover letter, but like hitting some of the key points is quite useful. Your expedited review motivation can be incorporated in the cover letter, or can be a separate page that gets attached to that. But that kind of upfront information is really, really important. If you are doing a purely document review, all of this still needs to go to ethics. So you would still submit to us as the DRC your submission package as usual, but you include in your cover letter that, like, make it very clear, this is only a document review using published material. I'm therefore requesting a waiver of human ethics approval. Then when HREC gets it and when we get it, we know exactly what to do with it, and we don't have to go searching through to see what's what. Yeah, you want to make life for the reviewer as easy as possible in general. On secondary data analysis, this comes up a lot. So as a question to you all, if you're analyzing a data set from a previously completed study, in this example, patients reported on counseling topics received. So you're not talking to patients, you're not recruiting patients, but you're using data that's self-reported from patients. Is this human subjects data? Yes. Okay, the answer is yes, if you're unsure. Yes. So in the HREC forms where it asks about, like, is this human subjects data? The answer is almost always yes, unless you are doing a document review and you're not accessing any like individual level patient data. You're doing secondary analysis of specimens. Those came from a human being. You're doing secondary analysis of you're doing a record review. That's human subjects data, and it goes through the human subjects approval process. So just to be mindful of that. So tick yes. This section is weirdly hidden in a space around insurance. Yeah, no fault insurance. But they do, like, you do need to tick it, and then you would just say not applicable. There's no need for no fault insurance. So just to keep that in mind. Some of the other things that come up in secondary data analysis projects, which happen a lot for our students, is just an insufficient consideration of the ethical considerations that are specific to the project that the student is doing. So we often get a protocol that talks about all the consent and all the things that were there in the parent study, and people were referred for counseling, and there were these things in place and how much they got reimbursed, but then don't talk at all about like data safety and how the data is being anonymized or de-identified and how the data is going to get stored and whether there is any potential ethical repercussions for use of this data for this particular purpose. So just a reminder that it's a general comment, I guess, but it comes up a lot, that the protocol needs to be focused on the topic of the research question and the study that is the focus. If your project is involving minors, so under the age of 18, regardless of whether it's a secondary data analysis or it's a primary data analysis project, it requires this Form A ministerial consent for non-therapeutic research in minors. So there's a separate process through that the government requires for any research that is including human subjects data from minors. For systematic reviews and document reviews, like we've spoken about, this just follows the usual process. It goes to HREC. It's usually quite quick, as long as you're very clear in your cover letter that it's only document review, and there's alignment between that and what you say in your protocol. You don't suddenly in the protocol talk about doing focus group discussions. You should get a pretty quick response with a letter. It also gives you your HREC reference number, which is actually sometimes required by a journal if you want to publish your systematic review. So it covers you in that regard as well. The PI synopsis, I'm not going to go through all of these points, but I would really recommend you just read the synopsis guidance from HREC and try not to make it too long. So like the synopsis for HREC is focused really on like, what are you doing and what are the core ethical implications? So we don't need like 3 pages of background. You want to stick to what are the core things that are relevant for ethics in this space. So like usually a page and a half max, but most student projects can have a 1-page synopsis is usually sufficient. Keep it simple, make sure it's clear, make sure it aligns with what you've said in the FHS 013, the ethics form, and what's in your actual protocol. This is a section in the ethics form that's also sometimes problematic. So there's a question 3.3, is there any vulnerability associated with the proposed participant group? And then 3.4 is specify the level of risk associated with the research. So 3.3 is really talking about the population that you're researching. So you might be doing a very low risk study, a secondary analysis. You've got de-identified data on maybe people who inject drugs. You're doing a super low risk research, but the population has high vulnerability. And so the ethics is looking for you to say, I understand that this is a vulnerable population. and I'm going to do this research in this way, and this is why the research is necessary and it's not a problem. So you want to, what we often see is people just say this is a secondary data study in under 3.3 and 3.4, which doesn't really answer the question. Consider data and not just biological specimens. So section 5.14 talks about future use. And I think people often read this as like stored specimens and things like that. But increasingly, our data it's also human subjects data, and it does get used across projects, and people use like broad consent and want to use data for other purposes. So don't just dismiss this section. Also the section on whether things will be shared. So if you're doing a project maybe with an external collaborator, or you, what's one I reviewed recently where it's data that will be received from the NICD. So it's a secondary data analysis of de-identified data, but there might be a need for a data sharing or a data use agreement with NHLS or NICD or another institution or whatever it is. So just be mindful of that. And 5.16 around protecting privacy and confidentiality. I don't know about, maybe it's where this is in the form. People often just skip this section and don't fill it in. Please write something in 5.16. Usually it comes straight from the data management section in your protocol, asking about how you're going to store the data, how you're going to ensure confidentiality. I think it just gets missed in terms of where it's placed on the form. In the actual protocol, this comes up mostly in student research, and it might be a case of like if an experienced supervisor, or maybe this is sometimes an issue with an external supervisor who's less familiar with the requirements of the degree in the school. But we quite often get protocols that are just a bit thin. There's just not enough information, or sort of very like vague, bulleted out ethical considerations, things like that. It does require a little bit more engagement in the topic, both in terms of the background and rationale and the specific things that you're talking about. And sometimes there's inconsistency between the objectives and the analytic approach, or like what people actually say they're going to do, the question they want to answer and what they say they're going to do, or there's inconsistency between what they write in the FHS 013, the ethics form, what they say in the synopsis and what they say in the protocol. So like we've had ones come through where it's like, they say that it's just a document review, but then they talk about interviewing providers, and it's like you have to kind of piece together all the pieces. So do just, as a supervisor or as a student, just take a step back and be like, okay, what am I actually doing, and is this clearly reflected in all components of the application? So yeah, the sort of final thoughts is some proofreading and logic is really helpful for all of us. I think we've got a number of layers, so we do pick things up, and we try to be mindful that everybody is busy and navigating a lot of things in the way we respond. So we try not to respond in a way that is offensive in any way, but do need to sort of highlight these issues that come up. Make sure you download the latest forms. Yeah, we've said that a lot of times. Submit early. Please don't wait for like the D-Day, particularly the end of the year for the DRC deadline. Things get really, really busy. I should have actually checked that in terms of those 126, how many came in at the end of the year. But it was a lot for those of us who were reviewing. It was a lot. So submit as soon as you can. Please name your documents in a logical fashion. And then Lisa Marie pointed out to me also to please name your email thread in a logical fashion, so that it really helps us to be able to track what's going on. So like ideally your document should be named like your surname and the date or something, and the email chain as well, you know, like Phillips, staff protocol, whatever. That really helps us to not have 100 emails that just say like new MPH protocol or something. Lisa Marie is unbelievably helpful for any of you who have engaged with her. She's always happy to answer questions, and she just knows a lot. And if she doesn't know, she will make a plan to find out. And often she's just relaying the information. So don't take out your frustration on Lisa Marie. It's not Lisa Marie, it's one of us who've done the review. So don't take out your frustration on her. And if you have any questions, do email the DRC. And we will be as responsive as we can. I'm sure that there are other things. I just wanted to open it to the other DRC reviewers who are in the room and online. And Lisa Marie, I know you're online as well. Are there other things that have come up that we haven't raised, or are there things from other members of the audience that have come up for you, or other questions about DRC processes? We can just open it up for discussion. Go for it, Nsiki.
Thanks, Sally. I think that the one thing pointed out is if like area, and I think is that to find that sometimes the protocol itself does not align fully with the synopsis or FHS 0124. So if people can just be mindful of that, because it causes unnecessary things. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I think that it would mean that your forms will be sent to. I know we are missing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you can just look at it.
I think, yeah, thank you for raising that again. So Nsiki said again, the sort of alignment between the different components, because very often the delay, like we're pretty efficient, I think, but where there are delays, it's because there's confusion. Like we weren't actually able to figure out what it was that was happening. So we weren't able to assess whether it was sufficient or not, because it wasn't clear. Are you doing interviews or are you not doing interviews? Where's the data coming from? What's happening? And so we flag all these like what if questions. And I think the person often has a very clear idea, it just hasn't come across very clearly in the protocol. So that is a point of delay. Tabelo, yeah.
Okay, mine is on the referencing side.
Yeah.
So Vancouver versus Harvard, I don't know what the school prefers. And also usually when it's Harvard, the inconsistencies, like of course there are different formats of Harvard. It would be good that they stick to one and not go into it, because we don't want to be commenting on that.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think just around consistency. So we can't tell you what referencing style to use, and we will not make that our problem as the DRC. But do be consistent within your protocol on what you're using. And I don't think it would be inappropriate for a DRC reviewer to flag like that you haven't sufficiently cited the literature, like you've got sections that require citation that are not cited, or that there's other issues, because it ultimately just points to another layer of like lack of attention, I guess, and like what are the other potential issues. So yeah, I think consistency, the same as just like the formatting. I think the same as sometimes we get a very thin protocol. It's just like if the flow is difficult to follow, if we can't figure out what goes where and there's inconsistencies, it just means that in the middle of whatever we're doing in the day and we're putting aside the time to review, like there's things where like I can't easily figure this out, so I'm going to have to come back to it. It just makes things take much longer. I think that's a good point. Yeah.
In terms of things that like we include as an appendix or whatever parent study presented us at, like the instruments that are being used, if it's like a validated instrumental questionnaire that has a reference rate, do you have to sort of include?
I don't think so. I usually get students to submit like the questionnaires that are relevant for the work that they're doing, even not the full necessarily questionnaire that happened in the study, but just for reference. I'm not sure if HREC would specifically request it, with the exception of if it's a primary data collection. Sorry, I was thinking if it's a secondary data analysis of stuff that's already been collected and it's a valid, like you're doing the audit and is the audit, and that's probably fine. If it's a primary data collection study, you would be expected to submit the full questionnaires. Any comments from anyone online or any other questions? Anything we haven't addressed? Not seeing any hands or any comments. Anything else from in the room? Andrea, yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Tammy. Just a couple of things. The data management plan. I think this confuses students that they have to complete it even if they do a systematic review or a scoping review. And I don't know if you can speak to that a bit, what the requirement is. Thanks.
That is a good question, and I'm going to answer what I think is the answer, but I will I will clarify because I'm not 100% sure. So are you talking about what's expected within the ethics forms, which are obviously not set up for, they're like expecting human subjects data? Are you talking about that section in the ethics forms?
Well, actually on the MOU, the student is required to respond to it, but then also within their protocol, they would need to mention it.
Yeah.
And I think they have to fill it in on the UCT website as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so the UCT like data management platform, which is something we should probably talk more about at some point. I think that it's important for it to be there in terms of how but it can be brief and relevant to the work, like to the review that the student is doing. So we're going to load publications into Zotero and we're going to deduplicate them and we're going to use Ray and whatever. And again, just making very explicit that there is, it's only like publicly available aggregate level data. There's no individual level data. I think that's what it's looking for. So some of this is where the forms are not quite designed for the things that we're trying to necessarily do. Similarly, the FHS 013, like if you're doing a secondary data analysis, some parts of it are difficult to fill in. If you're doing a document review, the FHS 013 is very difficult to fill in, and there's a lot of like not applicables. But ultimately, we don't want lots of different forms that, you know, it's easier to have one form and fill out as best as you can and just be clear, even if it's repetitive, of like, this is only a document analysis, this is, there is no individual data, whatever. But it can be brief. I don't think a student should think that they need to do a very extensive data management plan for a systematic review.
Thanks. I think at the moment there's a confusion because most of the students, my students, I end up having to remind them that they need to do a data management plan and they tick it as no on the MOU. But I liked what you just said in terms of the examples of what they could include, and maybe that would be helpful to have something like that on the website. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that suggestion. So we've been thinking about actually doing a few like templates for things that people sometimes struggle with, like even a cover letter. Like if you've just got an example and you can fit it back, you can populate it, like we can easily pull some of those things together. Data management plans are also useful. And there are actually a bunch of templates of the data management plans, but I haven't looked specifically for document reviews, but it might be worth checking on that as well. But that's a very good point. And I know for students, any point of like where it gets a bit confusing because it's not 100% clear, it's like the kind of thing where maybe we would, you know, just write something and move on, where a student can get stuck on that for quite a long time trying to figure out what they should do. So yeah, we can definitely look into doing that. Any other comments, thoughts? All right, then you get 5 minutes back of your day. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Patience, and thank you, Lisa Marie, who's in the background there. We will share the slides and the recording and hope to hear from you during the course of the year at the DRC. Cheers, everyone.